The courtroom went still the moment he walked in, a sheriff in full uniform, badge polished, arrogance brighter than the fluorescent lights. He did not just ignore Judge Judy. He challenged her, smiling like the law was something he loaned her. 3 minutes later, that smile was gone, replaced by a fear he could not hide. She tore through his lies like paper. Bribery, murder cover-ups, innocent people rotting in jail for crimes he committed. The maximum sentence dropped like a bomb. But then Judge Judy leaned forward and said something that made him collapse. What was it? But before we get into it, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and hit subscribe for more shocking courtroom moments. The sheriff walked in like the courtroom belonged to him. Not the state, not the people. Him. The cameras followed the swagger in his stride, the polished badge catching the fluorescent lights like a taunt. His boots clicked with an officer's authority, but the way he held his chin, that was arrogance. Pure, unfiltered, comfortable arrogance. The kind that did not enter a courtroom to be judged, but to remind everyone who usually does the judging. Judge Judy watched him with a stillness that felt sharper than any raised voice. She did not blink when he nodded at her, a nod not of respect, but of challenge. As if the law itself should be grateful he bothered to stop by. The victim's family shifted in their seats, shoulders tight, eyes lowered. Their grief did not tremble anymore, it had calcified. Years of unanswered questions had turned their silence into something heavy enough to press down on every person in the room. The sheriff flashed a grin at them, a grin he had used on traffic stops, town meetings, press conferences, a grin that said, "I am untouchable." But today, under these lights, the smile strained at the edges, just slightly too bright to be real. Judge Judy lifted her pen, a quiet gesture, a small one. Yet the room responded like someone had thrown a switch. Even the air seemed to pause. "Sheriff," she said, voice steady, controlled. "Take your seat." He did, but not before leaning one elbow on her bench as if it were a bar counter and he was settling in for a casual conversation. The bailiff's eyebrow twitched, the first visible crack in the room's decorum. Judy did not react, not outwardly, but her eyes followed the sheriff's hand as it slid a stack of neatly stapled papers forward. He pushed them across her bench without asking permission, without invitation. Papers rustled like whispers trying to warn him. "These are the reports," he said. "All clean." There it was again, that subtle tilt of his chin, the smirk behind the words. The message, "I run this town. You just preside over it." Judge Judy let the papers sit untouched. The victim's mother stared at them too, but not with curiosity, with dread, as if she knew exactly what those papers were supposed to erase. Judy finally reached out, pinching the stapled corner with 2 fingers. She lifted the stack just enough to feel its weight. Something shifted behind her expression, not shock, not anger, recognition. "Sheriff," she said softly, "why is your signature on documents you claim never existed?" The sheriff's grin faltered, only for a breath, but it was enough for the entire courtroom to see. And then the clerk placed a second file on Judy's desk, one the sheriff definitely had not brought, and the room went silent as she asked, "Care to explain this one?" The sheriff's jaw tightened the moment the second file touched Judge Judy's desk. He had not placed it there, and that made it dangerous. The folder looked ordinary. No scorch marks, no dramatic labels, no handwritten warnings. Just a simple beige file with a single red tab. But in a courtroom like this, the plainest objects often carried the heaviest consequences. Judge Judy ran a finger along the edge before opening it, her movements slow, deliberate, almost surgical. The room leaned forward without meaning to. Even the bailiff's posture shifted, weight settling, readying for rupture. The sheriff sat back in his chair, forcing his shoulders into a relaxed position. But his eyes betrayed him. They tracked the folder with the hyper-focus of a man watching a fuse burn toward a bomb he buried. His smirk was gone now, replaced by something colder, thinner. Calculation. Judy pulled out the first document, a booking form, the victim's brother's name printed neatly across the top. The courtroom air thickened instantly. The victim's mother reached for the edge of her seat, fingertips trembling. "Sheriff," Judy said, "this form records the arrest you claimed never occurred." He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that is not an official document." Her eyes did not lift from the page. "Your signature is at the bottom." A flicker. Barely a millisecond. But the sheriff's face cracked, the smallest fracture in the mask he spent years crafting. He forced a laugh, but the sound was thin, dehydrated of confidence. "Your Honor, people forge signatures all the time. I can tell you right now that is not..." "Enough." Judy held the form up. "This signature matches the ones on the reports you gave me, the ones you said were clean." The victim's mother let out a quiet sob, not of surprise, but of confirmation. The truth she had carried alone for years finally had shape, ink, weight. The sheriff shifted again. Too many shifts. Too much movement for a man who had walked in like he owned the oxygen in the room. "And this," Judy continued, pulling out a second sheet, "is an internal memo stating the arrest was to remain off record until further notice." Her voice hardened. "Explain that." His tongue pressed against his cheek, jaw working, trying to assemble a lie strong enough to hold. But every second of silence made the room feel brighter, harsher, like the lights themselves were interrogating him. "Judge," he muttered, "you're looking at it wrong." "No," she replied, closing the file with a soft thud that sounded louder than a gavel. "I am looking at it exactly as written." The sheriff swallowed hard. And then the side door opened, and the witness who had been too afraid to testify last year walked in, eyes trembling as they landed on him. The witness stepped inside as if crossing a boundary he had avoided for years. His eyes never met the sheriff's. That silence said everything. He wore a deputy's uniform that no longer fit him, not because of weight, but because the badge on his chest no longer felt like something he deserved to wear. The stitching on his sleeve trembled with the same quiet fear that moved through his hands. Judge Judy watched him approach the stand, not with impatience, with recognition. This was a man carrying more truth than his body was built to hold. "State your name," she said. He swallowed, voice barely rising. "Deputy Carter, Your Honor." The sheriff exhaled sharply through his nose, the way a man does when confronted with a ghost he hoped never to see again. Carter's gaze stayed glued to the floor. I was part of Sheriff Dalton's unit for 6 years." The room didn't dare breathe. "When Sanderson disappeared," Carter continued, "I was the last person who spoke to him." The sheriff leaned forward, forcing a laugh that fell dead on arrival. "Your Honor, this man was disciplined twice for misconduct. He is not a reliable..." Judy lifted a hand. Silence cut him off more cleanly than any gavel. "Deputy," she said, "speak freely." Carter's throat bobbed. "Sheriff Dalton told us to stop filing certain reports, told us to rewrite others, told us Sanderson was becoming a problem." A murmur rippled through the room. Even the victim's mother raised her eyes for the first time. "What kind of problem?" Judy asked. Carter's breath shook. He had discovered evidence tying the sheriff to illegal detentions, bribery, threats to witnesses. His voice cracked. "He said he was going to come forward." The sheriff shot to his feet. "That is a lie." But his voice trembled. The courtroom recorded it. The audience felt it. "Sit," Judge Judy said, calm but cold enough to cut granite. "You will speak when spoken to." For the first time since he entered the room, the sheriff obeyed. Carter pulled something from his pocket, a small silver flash drive, holding it as though it might burn him. "This is footage Sanderson saved the night before he disappeared," Carter whispered. "I found it after the fire. I was too afraid to bring it forward until now." A collective inhale froze the room. Judge Judy extended her hand. Carter placed the drive onto her palm with the reverence of someone handing over a final piece of a broken truth. The sheriff's face drained of color. Judy turned toward the clerk. Her voice sliced the courtroom stillness. "Prepare the screen. We are going to play this." The lights dimmed as the monitor flickered to life. No one moved, not even the sheriff. For a moment there was only static, soft crackling, gray noise drifting across the screen like ghosts trying to form words. Judge Judy folded her hands, elbows resting lightly on the bench. Her eyes never left the monitor. She did not need to. She could already feel the sheriff unravel beside her. The footage stabilized. A cramped office appeared, the camera tilted slightly, as though Sanderson had set it up in a rush. Papers cluttered the desk. A badge lay face down near a half-empty cup of coffee. The timestamp blinked in the corner, the last hour anyone saw Deputy Sanderson alive. And then the sheriff walked into frame. Not the sheriff who had swaggered into the courtroom earlier. This version looked different, too quick, too agitated, pacing across the small room with a frantic energy that stripped away every layer of practiced authority. His voice came through the speakers, sharp and breathless. "You think you can go to internal affairs with this?" he snapped. "You think they'll listen to you?" The room reacted, chairs shifting, breaths tightening. Victim's mother covered her mouth. On screen, Sanderson's voice trembled. "I have copies, Dalton. If anything happens to me—" The sheriff lunged toward the camera, knocking something over. The screen shook violently, capturing flashes of movement, a hand, a shadow. Then the footage cut to the sheriff speaking in a lower tone, almost smug. "You should have stayed quiet." The courtroom felt colder instantly, as if the truth itself had dropped the temperature. Sheriff Dalton sprang to his feet. "This is edited. That is not complete. You cannot accept that." Judge Judy did not turn toward him. "Sit." The word was quiet, but it hit with the force of a gavel strike. He hesitated. The hesitation alone told the room everything it needed to know. Beside him, the bailiff stepped forward, not touching him, just existing close enough to remind him where he was. Judy rewound the footage, slowing it frame by frame. "Deputy Carter," she said, "you said Sanderson hid this himself?" "Yes, Your Honor," Carter whispered, "in a vent behind his desk. I found it before the fire reached that side of the room." The sheriff's breathing became irregular. His hand gripped the table so tightly his knuckles whitened. Then Judy paused the footage on a single blurred frame, something faint in the background, a reflection in a glass cabinet behind the sheriff, a silhouette. Not Sanderson's, someone else had been in that room. The courtroom gasped. Sheriff Dalton's chair screeched backward as he stood, voice cracking. "You do not know what that is?" Judge Judy finally looked at him, one sharp, unwavering stare that froze him mid-breath. "Oh," she said quietly, "but I will." She leaned forward, tapped the reflection on the screen, and said, "Zoom in on that. Right now." A single tap of Judge Judy's finger echoed louder than the gavel. The screen froze on the blurred reflection. Someone stood behind the sheriff. The technician zoomed in slowly, each pixel stretching until the truth began to take shape. What had once been a smudge of light and shadow evolved into a silhouette. Broad shoulders, a distinct outline, and the unmistakable shape of a phone held discreetly at chest height. A phone recording. Not Sanderson's camera. Someone else had been documenting the confrontation. Judge Judy leaned back, eyes narrowing as the figure sharpened into a partial face. Just enough to expose identity, not enough for the sheriff to deny. "Sheriff Dalton," she said, her voice steady as still water, "do you recognize this man?" He didn't answer. Not immediately. His tongue pressed against the inside of his cheek as if trying to conjure a lie, thick enough to swallow the truth forming on the screen. The victim's mother whispered something to her daughter, something small, a breath of recognition or dread. Their eyes locked on the reflection, watching history rewrite itself in real time. Carter shifted in the witness chair. "Your Honor, that looks like Mark Ellison, local contractor. Sheriff Dalton met with him a lot, off hours, off record." Off morals, the room seemed to think. The sheriff scoffed, but the sound cracked at the edges. "Ellison is a friend. He stops by sometimes. That proves nothing." Judge Judy raised a brow. "It proves he was present during a conversation involving threats, suppressed reports, and the disappearance of a deputy. It proves access. It proves proximity. And proximity," she added, her voice cooling, "is often the birthplace of conspiracy." Carter swallowed. Ellison was involved in several cases where evidence went missing. Sanderson mentioned he suspected kickbacks. Victim's mother stiffened. "Ellison was the one who approached my son, said he could make things go away. For a price. The sheriff shook his head violently. This is ridiculous. You people will believe anything. But his voice lost its echo. His authority was no longer a shield. It was a memory. Every time he denied, the truth dug deeper into the cracks forming across his composure. Judge Judy turned the page on the folder in front of her. A photograph slid out, printed on glossy paper, edges worn as if handled many times. The same contractor, Ellison, shaking hands with Sheriff Dalton beside a stack of unmarked envelopes. She lifted it between two fingers. This photograph was submitted anonymously 3 months ago, she said. No context, no signature. But now, connected to this footage, the story becomes painfully clear. Sheriff Dalton's breath hitched, a sound you could feel more than hear. It is not what it looks like, he whispered. Judy's gaze hardened. Then tell me, Sheriff, what does it look like? He had no answer, and when the clerk entered carrying a burnt, sealed evidence envelope, one the sheriff thought had been destroyed, the entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. The envelope landed on Judge Judy's bench with a soft thud, but the sheriff reacted as if someone had detonated something beneath his feet. His eyes locked onto the singed edges like they were glowing. The clerk set the burnt evidence pouch down carefully, as though it were alive. The plastic crackled under the fluorescent lights, the rim warped, the contents still visible through the melted haze. Years of secrets had clung to this envelope, and somehow it survived everything meant to erase it. Judge Judy didn't open it immediately. She studied the sheriff instead, watching the air drain from his posture. Sheriff Dalton, she said, you told investigators this envelope was destroyed in the fire. He swallowed. Hard. As far as I knew, it was. You were the first one on scene, Judy replied. You supervised the cleanup. You confirmed the loss. The bailiff stepped closer, not touching him, but close enough to send a message. Lie carefully. The sheriff leaned forward, gripping the desk. I did what procedure required, nothing more. Carter shook his head from the witness stand. No, Your Honor, that is not true. He ordered us out of the room. Locked the door from the inside. He stayed in there 20 minutes alone. A ripple moved through the courtroom, the kind that travels through wood, air, and spine. Judge Judy finally lifted the envelope. It was heavier than expected. Inside, charred paperwork, binding clips half melted, edges curled like burned leaves. But beneath the damage, there were still words, numbers, signatures, evidence with a heartbeat. She opened it slowly, separating the pages with the care of someone handling the remains of truth itself. Payment logs, she murmured. Cash withdrawals, receipts. Her voice sharpened. All connected to Mark Ellison. The victim's mother let out a quiet gasp. And here, Judy continued, pulling out a page with a dark soot stain across the corner, a list of names, including your son's. Her eyes met the mother's, gentle for a moment, steady, anchoring her grief. Then Judy turned back to Dalton, voice turning cold again. These are not clerical errors, these are not misunderstandings, these are deliberate acts of concealment. The sheriff's shoulders rose and fell too fast, panic disguised as breathing. You do not know the pressure I was under? He snapped. You do not know what these people were involved in. These people, Judy repeated, were citizens, not collateral. He opened his mouth to fire back, but no words arrived. The truth had finally outrun him. Her tone lowered. Sheriff, where were you the night Deputy Sanderson died? The question hit him harder than anything before. His face drained, his lips parted, but sound refused to escape. Before he could answer, the courtroom door swung open, and the forensic analyst stepped inside, holding a metal evidence box scorched by fire and time. The forensic analyst didn't speak at first. He simply placed the scorched metal evidence box on the bench, and the thud of it made the sheriff flinch. The analyst's gloves were still smudged with ash, as though whatever truth he carried refused to let go of him. Judge Judy nodded for him to proceed, her expression unreadable, the calm before a storm she already knew the direction of. Your Honor, he said, voice steady, this box was recovered from the fire that destroyed Deputy Sanderson's office. It contains partial remains of materials that did not burn at the same rate as everything else. A quiet murmur washed through the courtroom, a tide of dread rising around the sheriff inch by inch. Judge Judy's gaze shifted toward Dalton. "Sheriff, you reported that no evidence survived." He wiped his palms on his uniform. "Because there was nothing left, Your Honor. The fire, the analyst interrupted gently, was not accidental." Dalton's breath caught. "We detected accelerants on the south wall," the analyst continued, lifting a charred metal plate. "Someone used a controlled ignition, and based on burn patterns, the fire started at two separate points. The room reacted. Gasps, shifting seats, a sudden pressure in the air. Dalton tried to stand, but the bailiff's presence kept him anchored. Anyone could have. It was chaos that night. There were multiple responders. "Except," the analyst said, "the key to Sanderson's office was logged out under your ID 30 minutes before the fire started." Dalton's eyes widened, a trapped animal glint piercing through the cracks of his composure. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "Where were you during those 30 minutes?" He opened his mouth. No words. The analyst continued, pulling out a bent piece of metal. "This is what remains of Deputy Sanderson's badge. We found it beneath a shelf that fell early in the fire. It should have melted completely, but something shielded it." "What shielded it?" Judy asked. The analyst unfolded a melted strip of cardboard, blackened but still intact in the center, a shipping label. Carter inhaled sharply. That looks like the box Sanderson said he used to hide his personal copies of evidence." Judy looked directly at the sheriff. "Did you know about this box?" Dalton shook his head too fast, too practiced, too transparent. The analyst lifted another fragment, faint handwriting, blurred by heat. The victim's mother gasped softly. "That's my son's name." Dalton squeezed his eyes shut, the truth beginning to crush him from all sides. "Sheriff," Judy said quietly, "Sanderson was preparing to expose you. He told people he feared for his life, and then he vanished, and the room holding his evidence burned." Her voice cooled to steel. "Explain that." Dalton's chest rose sharply, breath breaking. I can't." The analyst reached into the box one last time and pulled out something small, metallic, and unmistakable. "Your Honor," he said, "this has a fingerprint." The metallic object gleamed beneath the courtroom lights, warped by fire, but unmistakable. A badge. Deputy Sanderson's badge. The sheriff froze. The color drained from his face so quickly it looked as if the flames had returned and sucked the warmth straight out of him. Judge Judy signaled for the analyst to approach, her expression sharper than any blade. "Tell the court," she said quietly, "what you found." The analyst held the badge with both hands as if carrying the burned remains of a fallen truth. "Your Honor, we recovered this near the south wall, the wall that burned hottest. The badge should have been destroyed completely, unless something protected it during the initial burn." Dalton's throat bobbed. "This is ridiculous." The analyst continued. "On the back panel, we found a partial fingerprint." A chill moved through the room like a draft no one could locate. Judge Judy narrowed her eyes. "Whose print?" He inhaled, steadied himself. "Sheriff Dalton's." The reaction was immediate. Gasps, chairs scraping, a sharp cry from the victim's mother. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in closer, drawn by the gravity of a truth too heavy to stay hidden anymore. Dalton shot to his feet. "That badge was planted. Someone set me up." Judy lifted a single hand. He stopped mid-shout, the silence swallowing the rest of his sentence. "Sheriff," she said, "you claimed you never touched Sanderson's badge the night he disappeared. You claimed you were not in his office before the fire started. And yet, here we have a fingerprint on an object found inside a fire you said destroyed everything." Dalton shook his head wildly, words tripping over themselves. No, that is not possible. I wore gloves. I never touched." His own correction exposed him. Judge Judy leaned forward. "You wore gloves. For what exactly?" The sheriff stopped breathing. His eyes darted across the courtroom, searching for an ally, a lifeline, a place to hide from the truth tearing through him, but there was nowhere left to look, not even the floor wanted his gaze. Carter shifted uncomfortably on the stand. "Your Honor, Sanderson told me something before he disappeared. He said the sheriff came by that night, said he heard someone at the door around midnight." Dalton exploded. He was paranoid. And he was right, Judy interrupted, her voice cold enough to extinguish fire itself. The analyst stepped forward again. "There is more, Your Honor." He opened the evidence box and removed a melted phone case. "We found fragments of a recording device near the same wall. The internal card was damaged, but not completely." He held up a small, scorched memory chip. "This survived the fire." Now the sheriff truly faltered, gripping the table as if the floor were tilting beneath him. Judy motioned for the bailiff to take the chip. "We will examine this next." Dalton's voice broke for the first time. "No, you cannot." Her gaze locked onto him. "Sheriff, we already did." The analyst lifted a printed screenshot, Sanderson's final image, and the sheriff was standing in the doorway behind him. The screenshot trembled in the analyst's hand, but not nearly as much as the sheriff trembled when he saw it, his own silhouette, standing behind Sanderson. The color drained from his face in one slow, devastating ripple. The arrogant sheriff who entered this courtroom, the man who swaggered in with polished boots and a grin built on intimidation, was gone. What remained was someone hollowed out by the image of himself, frozen in a dead man's final moments. Judge Judy let the silence stretch, not to pressure him, to expose him. "Sheriff Dalton," she said softly, "do you deny this is you?" His lips parted, but sound refused to cooperate. His throat worked, but his voice cracked into air. The courtroom watched a man who had spent decades controlling others lose control of himself, molecule by molecule. Victim's mother stared, tears forming but not falling. She wasn't crying for him. She was crying because truth, finally, was starting to breathe again. Dalton attempted composure, gripping the defense table until his knuckles whitened. That image. It must be edited. Sanderson had enemies. People wanted to set me up. Judge Judy cut him off without raising her voice. "If someone wanted to frame you, Sheriff, they would not have needed your fingerprint." His eyes flinched, a microsecond collapse, but enough. The courtroom felt it like a pressure drop. Carter leaned forward on the stand. "Your Honor, Sanderson told me he was scared. He said he heard someone behind him that night. Said he thought it was Dalton." Dalton spun toward him. "You lie. You always hated me." "And yet," Judy interrupted, "everything he said matches every piece of evidence that survived the fire you claimed destroyed everything." The sheriff's breath started coming too fast, uneven, shallow, panicked. A man used to commanding a room was now struggling to command his lungs. He wiped sweat from his brow, his hand shaking violently. "Sheriff," Judy said, her tone steady as marble, "why did you file no missing person report for Deputy Sanderson?" He froze. The question struck him harder than the photo, harder than the badge, harder than the fingerprint. Suddenly the courtroom was too bright, the walls too close, the air too thin. I thought he ran off," Dalton stammered. "He was unstable, emotional." Judy's eyes narrowed. "Or did you think no one would ask where he went, because you already knew?" The sheriff's mouth opened, but only a broken gasp escaped, a sound more confession than denial. The courtroom felt it. His collapse had begun. Judge Judy closed the folder slowly, then looked him dead in the eyes. "There is something you have not told this court, and you are going to tell me now." The sheriff's breath hitched as if the truth were lodged in his throat. He opened his mouth to deny, but what came out sounded dangerously close to a confession. Dalton leaned forward, gripping the table like it was the only solid thing in a courtroom that suddenly tilted beneath him. His voice came out in fragments, the way a dam leaks before it breaks. You do not understand," he stammered. "Sanderson he was unstable. He was turning people against me. He attacked me first." Judge Judy didn't blink. "Is that your statement?" He shook his head too fast, too violently. It is part of it. You want the whole story? Fine. He inhaled sharply, as if pulling air out of the room itself. Sanderson was digging where he should not have been digging. He took files from my office. He threatened me. He said he had proof I was working with Ellison, but he twisted everything. He made it sound criminal when it was just business. The courtroom erupted into a low, horrified murmur. Victim's mother closed her eyes, a tear slipping out as though it had waited years for this moment. Judge Judy raised a hand and the noise died instantly. Sheriff, she said, you just admitted involvement in financial activity with a man tied to bribery allegations. Dalton blinked, realizing too late what he had revealed. No, I did not say that. You are twisting my words. Your words twisted themselves, Judy replied. His shoulders shook, his voice rose. He cornered me, Dalton shouted, voice cracking. He said if I did not make things go away, he would expose me. He threatened my career, my life. You think I wanted any of this? The courtroom watched the meltdown happen in real time. The tremor in his voice, the sweat gathering along his hairline, the panic buried beneath every syllable. But you did make things go away, Judy said quietly. Her calmness hit harder than any raised voice. Dalton stopped breathing for a full second. Then he whispered, I did what I had to do. Carter leaned forward, eyes widening. Your Honor, he is admitting it. He is admitting. I am not admitting anything, Dalton roared, slamming his hands onto the desk. Papers scattered, his badge clattered loudly against the wood, an accidental symbol of power he no longer had. Judge Judy spoke softly, but her words cut him clean. Sheriff Dalton, you cannot confess halfway. Either you tell the truth, or you continue lying in front of an entire courtroom that already sees through you. His face crumpled, part fury, part fear, part something dangerously close to guilt. I did not kill him, he whispered. I swear, I did not kill Sanderson. I just needed him to stop. The room froze. Judy's eyes hardened. What did you do to make him stop? Dalton's lower lip trembled. His hands fell to his lap, shaking uncontrollably. I cannot say, he whispered. Judge Judy leaned in, voice low and unforgiving. Then I will ask you a different question. Who helped you move the body? The sheriff's eyes darted toward the door as if the truth might escape through it before he had to speak it aloud. He opened his mouth, but the name slipped out like a wound reopening. Ellison, he whispered. A gasp rolled through the courtroom, not loud, but sharp, the kind of sound that cuts the air and lingers. Victim's mother gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles white, breath trembling. Carter closed his eyes as if hearing a ghost speak. Judge Judy did not move. You are confirming, she said softly, that Mark Ellison helped you. Dalton shook his head desperately, but the truth was already alive in the room. No, he forced me. He blackmailed me. Sheriff, Judy said, blackmail does not explain a burned office, hidden evidence, and a deputy who never made it home. Dalton's shoulders collapsed inward, like gravity itself had turned against him. He knew things, Dalton whispered. About me, about other cases. He said if I did not cooperate, he would ruin me. He recorded things. He followed me. I had no choice. Carter snapped his head up. Sanderson said the same thing, that Ellison was involved, that Dalton was protecting him. Dalton slammed his hands against the table. I was not protecting him. I was protecting everything else. Judge Judy's gaze sharpened. What everything else, Sheriff? A silence followed, the kind that empties a room of breath. Dalton's face twisted, panic and shame fighting for control. He knew about the wrongful arrests, Dalton said. All of them. The ones before the victim's son, years of them. He threatened to expose the books, the bribes, the favors I never should have taken. He controlled me with my own sins. His voice cracked. He owned me. The victim's daughter covered her mouth, tears spilling through trembling fingers. Sanderson found out, Dalton continued, eyes filling with a kind of grief no one expected to see in a man like him. He confronted me. He said he could not let it keep happening. His voice broke. I told him to walk away. I begged him. Judge Judy's expression didn't soften, but something shifted behind her eyes, the recognition of a tragedy that had spiraled long before today. "What happened next?" she asked. Dalton shook his head. "Ellison showed up. He heard us yelling. He pushed past me. He grabbed Sanderson. I told him to stop. I told him—" His breath hitched. A man drowning in his own history. "Sanderson tried to run," Dalton whispered. "I followed. I wanted to stop Ellison, but—" His voice collapsed. He fell. He hit his head. There was blood. Too much. Ellison panicked. He said we had to clean it up, that no one would believe the truth. "You listened to him," Judy said. Dalton nodded slowly, eyes hollow. "I helped him move the body." The courtroom shattered into sound, gasps, cries, a muffled scream from the victim's mother. Judge Judy waited for silence. When it came, it was devastating. Her next words were a scalpel. "Sheriff Dalton, Ellison has already confessed." Dalton's eyes widened, terror blooming across his face, swallowing what remained of him. And then Judy added, "He says you were the one who made the final decision." For the first time all day, the sheriff didn't fight the silence around him. He sank into it. Swallowed by the weight of the truth, he finally spoke aloud. The courtroom no longer buzzed with shock, it pulsed with something heavier. Grief. Betrayal. The slow recognition that what had unraveled in front of them wasn't just a scandal, it was a human tragedy, years in the making. Victim's mother held her daughter's hand, their breaths sinking through soft sobs, not loud, not dramatic, just heartbreak finally given permission to exist. The younger woman looked at the sheriff with eyes that had aged a decade in the last hour. "You took him from us," she whispered under her breath, barely audible, yet the room seemed to hear it anyway. Dalton didn't lift his head. His badge sat on the table in front of him, gleaming with a metallic indifference, a symbol of service, tarnished now by the hands that once wore it with pride. He reached toward it, then stopped halfway, afraid to touch what no longer belonged to him. Deputy Carter's voice cut through the tension, soft, trembling. "Your Honor, I should have come forward sooner." Every eye turned to him. Carter swallowed hard. "Sanderson told me everything. He begged me to help him. I was too scared. The sheriff controlled everything. Schedules, patrol assignments, who got backup, who didn't." His voice cracked. "I thought if I stepped out of line, I'd be next." Judge Judy's expression remained steady, but something flickered in her gaze. Not sympathy, but understanding, the kind that acknowledges how fear can shape a person's silence. "Deputy Carter," she said, "fear may explain your silence, but it does not excuse it." Carter bowed his head. "I know, Your Honor." Judy returned her attention to Dalton, who looked smaller than he ever had, a man shrinking beneath the weight of the person he chose to become. "You misused your authority," she said, each word deliberate. "Not just through corruption or dishonesty or violence, but by forcing the people around you to compromise their integrity, to survive you." Dalton finally looked up, eyes red, voice raw. "I never wanted any of this." Victim's mother stood, slowly, painfully. "You didn't want consequences," she said, "but you wanted control." Her words hit the room with more force than any gavel. Dalton bowed his head again, and for a moment, he wasn't a sheriff or a perpetrator or a fallen authority. He was just a man crushed by the sum of his own choices. Judge Judy closed the file gently, her tone softer than before, not forgiving, but reflective. "This courtroom has heard enough to understand the scope of the damage," she said, "but we have not yet addressed what must be done about it." The lights seemed to sharpen, the air steadied, the room braced. Judy lifted a fresh document, untouched, unburned, and said, "Now we speak of consequences." Judge Judy lifted the fresh document, crisp, white, untainted, and for the first time all day, the sheriff flinched before she even spoke. The courtroom grew still, the way forests grow still before lightning strikes. There were no murmurs now, no shifting seats, no attempts to hide emotions. Everyone, every witness, every victim, every spectator knew they were standing on the edge of something final. "Sheriff Dalton," Judy began, her voice firm but steady. "This document outlines each verified incident of misconduct, coercion, falsification, and obstruction connected to your role as a public officer." Dalton's gaze dropped to the floor. He didn't blink, he barely breathed. Judy lifted the first page. "Count 1, evidence tampering." Her eyes flicked to him. "The wrongful arrest of the victim's son and suppression of exculpatory documentation." The victim's mother squeezed her daughter's hand. Their grief was no longer a question. It was a record. "Count 2, bribery and undisclosed financial dealings," Judy continued. "Payments received from Mr. Ellison in exchange for manipulating case outcomes." Dalton's jaw tightened, not in defiance, but in dread. He had nothing left to counter her with, no swagger, no smirk, no shield. Carter watched him, eyes filled with a complicated mix of sorrow and disgust. It was the look of someone realizing they had built years of loyalty on sand. "Count 3, Judy said, her tone colder than marble. "Abuse of authority, intimidation of subordinates, threatening citizens, targeting individuals who challenged your actions. Each charge weighed more than the last, heavy stones laid one after another atop his collapsing conscience." Dalton whispered, I tried to fix things before they got worse." Judge Judy didn't accept the lie, but she didn't raise her voice either. "No," she said. "You tried to hide them." He squeezed his eyes shut. Judy turned the page. "Count 4, mishandling a missing persons case. Deputy Sanderson reported fears for his safety, and you ignored or suppressed his pleas for help." Victim's mother let out a soft, pained exhale. "Count 5, Judy finished. Obstruction and interference with the investigation into Deputy Sanderson's disappearance." Each word struck like a separate verdict. When Judy finally lowered the document, the room felt a fraction heavier, as if gravity itself took sides. "This court," she said, "recognizes not only the legal weight of these actions, but the human weight, the people you harmed, the lives you manipulated, the trust you fractured." Dalton finally met her eyes, and the devastation in his expression was unmistakable. Whatever arrogance he entered with had evaporated. What remained was a man seeing the total wreckage of his choices for the first time. Judy folded her hands. "You must answer for the damage you caused." The sheriff swallowed, throat tight. "Your Honor." "What happens now?" Her gaze sharpened, precise, unwavering, merciless in its clarity. "Now," she said, "we speak not of what you did, but what justice demands in return." Judge Judy did not raise her gavel. She didn't need to. Her silence alone was enough to make the sheriff brace as if awaiting impact. The courtroom felt suspended, every breath held in anticipation of a reckoning that had been years overdue. Dalton sat hunched, shoulders collapsed inward, hands shaking slightly in his lap. The badge he once polished with pride still lay on the table, a fallen emblem, stripped of meaning. "Sheriff Dalton," Judy began, her voice calm but weighted with purpose. "You built your authority on fear, and expected loyalty from those who had every reason to fear you." Her gaze moved to Carter. "You silenced deputies who should have been free to uphold justice." She shifted her focus to the victim's family, their grief now steady, anchored by truth. "You terrorized citizens who trusted you to protect them." Dalton swallowed, eyes wet but defiant in flashes, a man cycling through denial, regret, and something bordering on rage. "This court," Judy continued, "is not criminal court. I cannot imprison you. I cannot try you for homicide or corruption or conspiracy." A pause. But what I can do is ensure the truth you buried never finds another grave." Dalton's fingers curled, nails digging into his palms. "Therefore," she said, lifting another document, "the following civil penalties are issued without hesitation." The list unfurled like a moral ledger. "Restitution," she said, significant monetary compensation to the families harmed by your misconduct. Dalton flinched as though struck. The reopening, Judy continued, of every case you touched in the last 8 years, every wrongful arrest, every suppressed report, every manipulated outcome. Gasps rippled through the room, a blend of relief and disbelief. And finally, Judy said, her voice lowering to a surgical precision, formal referral to state and federal authorities, accompanied by all surviving evidence, including the materials you attempted to destroy. Dalton's head dropped. His hands covered his face. A sound escaped him. Not a sob, not a plea, but a hollow exhale of a man watching the last remnants of his constructed world disintegrate. Victim's mother stood slowly. "You took my son's future," she said. "Now you face yours." Dalton didn't lift his eyes. He couldn't. Judy allowed the silence to settle, grounding every emotional fracture in the room. Her expression remained composed, but her voice carried a gravity the courtroom had never heard from her before. "There is something you feared more than penalties," she said. "More than exposure, more than consequences." Her gaze pinned him in place. "You feared accountability." Dalton trembled, chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. He looked, for the first time, like a man truly meeting himself. Judge Judy slowly raised her gavel, not to strike, but to mark the weight of what came next. "And now," she said, "we come to the part you prayed would never arrive." Judge Judy held the gavel aloft, not as a weapon, but as the final truth he could no longer escape. The courtroom felt like it had shrunk. The walls seemed closer, the lights sharper, the silence unbearable. Sheriff Dalton sat trembling, a man who had once strutted through these halls with unshakable certainty. Now he was staring at the floor, hands limp in his lap, breath shallow and fractured. "Sheriff Dalton," Judy began, her voice steady, "justice is not revenge, and what happens next is not about punishing you, but about restoring the balance you shattered." He didn't move, couldn't. She continued, each word precise, calibrated. "This court formally orders maximum restitution, full release of the wrongfully held, and transmission of all evidence to state and federal authorities for criminal review." Dalton exhaled shakily, as though each sentence stripped another layer from him. "But before I conclude," Judy said, softening her tone but sharpening her meaning, "there is something more important than penalties." The courtroom leaned in. "You wore a badge," she said, "a symbol that belongs to those strong enough to protect others, and humble enough to know that protection is a privilege, not a throne." Victim's mother wiped her cheek. Carter bowed his head. "And you," Judy continued, "use that badge to shield yourself from consequences, to intimidate, to silence, to bury the truth under fear." Dalton shut his eyes, bracing for impact. "And now," Judy said, "I will give you the one thing you denied others." A pause. Silence charged the air. "Accountability." He swallowed. "Your Honor, please." Judy lowered her gaze, not in pity, but in finality. "Sheriff Dalton," she said, "look at the people you harmed." It took him several seconds, long, painful seconds, before he lifted his eyes toward the victim's family. The mother met his stare without a hint of forgiveness, only truth, only loss. Dalton shook violently. I never meant—" Judge Judy's voice cut through the trembling confession. "Yes, you did." He gasped. A breath punched out of him. Her next words were not loud, not harsh, but they landed with the weight of everything he had outrun his entire life. "Because meaning to do harm is not measured by your excuses, but by your actions." Dalton's face collapsed, tears spilling freely now, not from grief, from recognition. Then Judy delivered the final line. The line that broke him completely. "The difference between you and the people you arrested is that they were innocent, and you always knew you weren't." Dalton crumpled inward, a man unmade. Judge Judy lowered her gavel. The strike that followed wasn't just the end of the hearing. It was the end of the illusion he'd built around himself. The moment truth finally took back the room. Power can hide a lie for years. But truth waits, and when it arrives, arrogance has nowhere left to run.